everyone, this is the IoT Show. I'm Olivier, your host. So usually on the IoT Show, we talk about the technology, the underlying layers and so on. We don't talk that much about the final products. And here today, we'll talk about it and obviously technology that is underneath a little bit. And for that, we have Oscar. Oscar, how are you?
Good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
I'm great and fantastic. So we have fantastic weather here in the Pacific Northwest, which is exceptional. So just after the recording, I'm going to be out and walking outside, right? What about you? Where are you calling from?
I'm in Miami, and we've actually had it's been a really cold week this week. We had it down to like 20 degrees, and right now it's about 75 out. So super
Okay,
excited.
you're good. You're good. But I
Yeah,
heard
yeah.
like you had like everything freezing, which is not common down in Miami, right?
I mean, we had iguanas that were falling off trees and almost dying because it was so cold for them.
Gosh. Well, hopefully they're going to be fine.
Yeah.
So, Oscar, you came to the show to tell us about an IoT powered device, the SpaceSafe, which is a smart safe. So, before we get into the safe itself, I'd like for you to give me a little bit of color about yourself. Where are you coming from? Who is Oscar? Was talking today, and then introduce the SpaceSafe.
Yeah, so I'm Oscar Hedaya. I was born in New York, and I grew up around hustle and bustle. And for the last 15 years, I've been in product development and sales. And for me, the most important thing throughout that whole journey behind product development and tech is to make sure that I create awesome products for people that they really love. You know, that they didn't realize that they were missing in their lives before, but now since we have it and it exists, it makes their lives a lot easier or better or whatever was missing, it fills that void for them.
Nice. So we'll talk about, particularly this device, the SpaceSafe, which is a smart safe. And you mentioned the fact that, it's important to create products that delight the customer, but are useful for them, right? And sometimes technology appears to be, my wife will tell me that all the time when she struggles turning on the lights in the living room because they're all like automated and so on. Sometimes technology is not needed or overwhelming. So we'll definitely make a point about the fact that there are some very interesting and useful features that you're bringing. But tell me first, why do I want a smart safe versus a regular one?
Yeah, and so I wanted to actually say something in response to that. I think, the biggest issue, I think, when people are manufacturing and designing IoT devices, a lot of the times it's engineers who are thinking like, hey, like, let's design this out, but they're not always the best like use case scenarios for users, right? So
Yep.
like you can have, and that's kind of the problem that I see with some IoT devices, and specifically like the lights that your wife may have problems with. If if it's designed better, she wouldn't have those issues,
Yep.
um, and so that's something like we take seriously here. Uh, so answering your question, right? Why do you need a smart safe? Simply put, with a smart safe, and so I think we should define a little more about what a smart safe is. But
Yep.
traditional safes are just regular safes that everybody knows. But a smart safe is one that connects to the internet, and you have uh, usually a mobile app that will connect to the safe, and so you're always in control and you have visibility to your safe, right? So whatever that means for
Mhm.
different companies have different features. So why do you need one? Simply put, because if something, God forbid, happens to your safe and you're using a traditional safe that's not connected, then you just don't know if something's happening. If a burglar or a thief or even somebody you do trust is trying to break into your safe, you wouldn't know. And with a connected device, and specifically speaking of ours, if something happens, you instantly get notified.
Okay. Okay. Sounds to be like a very interesting feature indeed. So tell me about, elevator pitch about the device itself. We'll roll a video of it in the background, but give me your take on what are the main features. How does it look like? Give me a sense of what the safe is about.
Yeah, and so I briefly said like there are other safe companies out there. There's about three or four other safe companies that have connected devices. Ours is like super out there compared to theirs. And what ours has is we have a touch screen. We're the only safe on the planet to have a touch screen. We have cameras. We're the only company in the world to have cameras. We have tamper sensors and a bunch of other like really awesome features. And then on top of it, it connects to your phone. So visually, the way our safe looks, it doesn't look like a traditional safe. You know, when you speak about safes, people think of like, okay, there's this metal box, and it's this ugly metal box, and you'll see from the video. But our safe, basically, the front is all glass, and you can think of it almost like a Tesla screen on a safe.
Okay. Interesting. So Tesla screen on a safe and the ring of safes, basically, right? Because you have all these like device, like sensors you mentioned, cameras, and so on. But that begs the question: why do I need that much, right? Looks like a ring. Ring definitely serve an interesting purpose, right? And at the very beginning, people were saying, "Why do I need a camera on my ring?" And then they started understanding the features of being notified, being able to interact with a person, even if you're not at home. So, what about your safe? Why do I need cameras, for example?
Yeah, I mean, with everything in the world, there's always going to be people who say, I don't need that, right? But for the person who cares about like peace of mind, if they want to have anything that's like right away getting instant notifications, if you're the type of person who likes information, knowledge, that's perfect for you. And to take like several types of examples, for me, right, I have a safe in my home, of course. I mean, I'm the CEO of this safe company, and I had a housekeeper who goes and cleans my house once a week, and I had her come in my house when I wasn't expecting her to come, and I got a notification on my safe saying, there's been activity on your safe, and I said, wait, what? So when you compare like a traditional safe to not to this kind of connected device, you get this instant information, which again, if somebody's breaking into your house, if somebody is not breaking in like my housekeeper, and you want her there, but you have this, like, I wasn't expecting her to be there, but I opened up the app, I looked at the camera, and I see that she's just like cleaning and wiping down the safe. She's not trying to gain access to the safe. And
Yeah.
so for me to have these cameras, it's just this like next layer of security that's really beneficial and helpful.
Yeah.
And so that's a use case for personal, but then on top of it, you also have enterprise cases, you know? So if you have, for instance, we work with a chain of doctors' offices, and they have they have safes in their office, and for them, it's very important to have an activity log and to track every single thing that's happening to the safe, who's opening it, a
Mm.
visual representation, meaning they have video footage of the person opening it. Inside, they store, I don't know what they store, they don't really tell me, but they're obviously storing something. Maybe it's narcotics, maybe it's something that's really important that like no one else should be having access to. And they have video footage inside of who's taking whatever that is inside as well. So
Nice.
there's a lot of different use cases where if you had a traditional safe, it just doesn't translate for that layer of security that you're looking for, especially in 2026.
Yeah, and I'm glad you introduced this notion of non-consumer examples and use cases, because at the end of the day, this is probably a direction your company will go on to. Testing with consumer scenarios is definitely, in my opinion, a really good way to go, because now you get a sense of what people will do, won't do. You can test the liability, or the impact is lesser, right? And when it's about like drugs and so on, and or people could put guns in there as well. So it's super important to have these safes well locked and not reachable, I would say. But yeah, non-consumer examples, definitely I can see many of them that pop out in my mind. Let me ask you one thing about back to the comparison with the smart lights in my home, my wife likes to have a manual way of doing things, right? The actual switch should work to turn the light on and off. And at the same time, I should be able to turn it on and off with my watch or phone, or just when I talk, or based on some rules of presence in the room or not, right? So, what's the physical aspect of your safe that is traditional, I would say, and still, makes it a really good safe? Because I heard about the lock, the key, things that you can still open it manually if you want, like a traditional safe.
Yeah, exactly. And so just like, again, imagine just like a tablet, the same way you could get in on your tablet with the touch screen, you'll put in your PIN, you could put in a pattern to unlock that. If you don't want to do that, we also have a fingerprint sensor. So you could go in with the fingerprint sensor, it's FBI approved. And then, on top of that one last layer of security physically is also we have a key, and we have a partner in Europe, one of the largest manufacturers for keys and high quality keys. We use one of their keys, and it was actually approved by LPL, which is the lockpick lawyer, as a lock that he recommends. So we have it's about a $250, $300 lock that we put on this safe alone. And so you have this extra layer of physical security. If God forbid, there are people like you're saying, like let's say your wife says, "Hey, the screen isn't working, it doesn't work for me," or whatever she's saying. If she still wants to gain access to it, she still has the key, and you'll still get notifications that somebody accessed it with the key. You can still look through the camera. So all of that tracking is still there.
Okay, interesting. So back to the innovation, connected part of things and software, right? I've been in IoT for a long time. Talking security on IoT devices is definitely one of the big things with customers and on the IoT show as well. And I would argue that, and people might watching the video argue that, what, if that thing weren't connected, I still open it with a key and so on. At least it wouldn't be hackable. Software is hackable. That thing is connected. It's never 100%. You can put that many layers of software, safety, security. Yes. In very advanced security system, you need to have like a big, huge data center and running for you for 10 years to unlock that crypto, whatever. But still, it's never 100%. So what would you say to people, doubting the fact that a connected safe can be safe, if not safer, than a traditional one?
It's funny because when people say like hacking and breaking into something, the number one thing that you think about is like Hollywood and the movies, and 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 I think they like portray that hacking is much easier than it actually is. You
That's
know,
true.
and, and,
That's true. Yeah.
and it's very important that like we understand that as people, because part of it is theatrics, right? And so I was looking into this, and about 99 or 98% of hacking that people do is phishing for passwords, for
Hmm.
information. And for us specifically, the safe lives. There is no phishing. It doesn't exist for the safe because we have our own system. Everything is built on the physical safe, and we have our own operating system, and everything is saved locally. Nothing is saved in terms of like keys. Nothing is saved on the cloud.
Hmm.
Where if you have your online banking, they have to verify through the cloud, right? So you have this where keys are being sent, or tokens, or whatever you want to look, say that is being sent into the cloud. Technically, if you have hackers that could try to gain access to something like that, you know there's this layer of security that's more open to the public. We don't have that because everything is saved locally on the cloud. I mean, everything is saved locally on the device.
No
It's all
device. Yeah.
encrypted. um, the other thing is, it's funny because still, we talk about like security and hacking, and like it's funny because the banks and every other government entity, you have nuclear facilities, everything is online, and
Well, I
you
so yeah, I would argue some are not. Some are very much air gap, like nuclear facility. Part of the operations are really not of online at all, and you don't have a bridge between. But still, I hear you. I mean, like most of the banking services are on data centers, and they have access to the internet way or another, not to be exposed through APIs, but to connect to the banking, as other systems and so forth, right? So yeah, definitely, I'm with you on that one. Just it's not because something is connected that it's weak. You have to be intentional in where the data is stored, where things are encrypted, and how, and so forth, right?
Yeah, and on top of it, like I always say, the most important thing is, it's not just like the connected system. I mean, the connected IoT devices. It's what you're connecting to. You have to make sure that you have a good router. That's for me. That's one of the biggest things that like people
Mhm.
don't cheap out on a router. Get a good router that has good security. That that's just another layer of security. But there's one more thing I wanted to say specifically about it is what's cool about our safe, because you're always going to have people who say, I don't want to be connected. I don't want it to be connected specifically because it's also, it's storing my valuables.
Mhm.
If you ever did not want to have it online, you could have it offline and use it as a traditional safe. It's just a lot more secure. We do have that option in the system.
Okay.
But yeah,
Yeah, so talking features again, there are other smart safes out there. You mentioned them at the beginning. What are the things that make the SpaceSafe stand out compared to the other ones?
yeah. So I hate to say that because, like, in a way, I'm sort of speaking bad about my competition, and I don't like to do that.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you specifically, like, what we do really well, right?
Okay. Yep.
So um, some of these, so other companies, I think they're more focused on just having the ability to say that they're smart, and they don't have as much tech as we do. The closest company that has tech compared to us has about 20% of what we offer. And like I was saying before, we're the only company that has a touch screen. And
Mhm.
because of the touch screen, you're able to do so many other things. And like we have these awesome features. Uh, and before I get like dive into some of the features, um, it's important to like, if, just as an analogy for some people, is imagine just like a traditional safe is a flip phone,
Mhm.
and our safe, specifically the SpaceSafe, is like an iPhone where it just blows it out of the water. So going back to some of the cool features that we have. One of them is a panic pin. So if somebody is at your house and you're held up at gunpoint, God forbid, if you put your pin in backwards, it'll still unlock the safe, but it'll send out an emergency message to somebody, which
Mm.
for me, that's like gold. Um, the next thing we have that nobody else has is 2FA. The same way you have on like a Google Authenticator, you're able to do that with our safe.
Oh,
No other safe has that, and I think kind of the reasoning is because we have this touch screen, everything is like super intuitive, and you're seeing right in front of your eyes the features that you're able to do, and you could literally like off on. And
yeah.
I think because we have that, it's like super easy to use.
Yeah.
Um,
But to the touchscreen point, some might say, hey, if you have a phone next to your safe, you have a screen already, right? So why did you decide to put a screen on the device versus just using a companion app on the phone? There's like an actual reason for that, right?
Yeah, there is. So the phone, the way we separate ourselves from other smart safe companies is our phone is more of a listener. So and I think our audience will understand that, but other safe companies may be using the phone as their screen, right?
Mm-hmm.
But because of that, there's more susceptibility. No, I'm saying the wrong word. But
Sus-
there's more. Yeah, you know what I'm trying to say.
susceptible.
But
It's more
yeah,
susceptible to man in the middle attack or something like that, right?
Exactly. And so we don't even have these commands that exist from a mobile phone that says like, hey, you could unlock your safe from your mobile phone. We don't
Mhm.
believe in that because we're looking more at security. So these other companies that have where you could unlock your safe from the phone, I find that to be super insecure, extremely not secure. And especially if you're trying to sell a security device, and not just any security device. Like this is supposed to store your sacred valuables. Your grandmother's
Mhm.
heirlooms. Um, Anything that like you really, really, really don't want somebody to gain access to. Having a phone unlock a safe, it's not. It doesn't do it.
Yeah.
You know.
No, I like it. No, I like it, and I like the way you've been thinking about things from the same perspective. Someone, let's say, in industrial automation or nuclear facility for a controller or whatever has been thinking, which is it's a critical asset you're protecting. Could be IP in certain industrial domains, could be physical assets in others, and you've been approaching it like an IoT slash embedded project, basically, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So, Oscar, we're getting at time. There's a one couple of questions. I'm sure many people will already be, surfing the website and have seen that information. But with all these features, the touchscreen and all the fancy lights and cameras, how expensive is that safe? Is it like a super high luxury type of thing that is hard to attain, or is it like a Tesla where you have tons of features? It's a great car. It's not more expensive than regular car. It's not that much.
Yeah. So it costs $1,300,
Okay.
and what it's I think, and maybe I'm a little biased, but I think for what you're getting, it's extremely worth it, right? If you think of it, you're getting most of these other companies, they use like a $5 or $10 lock to
Yeah.
secure your balance.
Yeah.
You could break into it with like a hanger if you wanted to. And so that,
Which you
yeah,
have because your safe might be in your room, right? And so you have that just there, and you can unlock that safe. But yeah, not a good thing.
but yeah, so you have like a $250 lock. So if you just subtract, if you start adding all these subtractions, it's not that much more than a great quality safe at the same price point. So you're really getting an enormous benefits out of it. And
Yeah.
the other thing I didn't really talk about was OTA updates. Um,
Mhm.
we have OTA updates. So as we're releasing new features, similar to like we keep talking about Tesla, but similar to how Tesla has like, if you have a car from 8 years ago, if you're downloading the newest update, they'll you're still getting these incredible new features for an old car, and it'll work based on your hardware, of course, but
Mhm.
um, you have these new features. If you have updates that you want to roll out specifically to hardware, you could do that also with an OTA update. And the reason I brought that up was there's a competitor of mine that actually they had to recall 500,000 safes because their fingerprint reader, after you enroll the first finger, anytime you try to access the finger, it would validate anyone's finger. So you could just imagine how not secure that is, So
Yeah.
um, yeah, I you asked me a question. I totally ignored your question. I
No,
took
no, you were
control and
actually you were spot on the question because you were definitely once again proving you approach that the same way an industrial would approach an IoT system. All right. It's, you think about the use cases, you think about the value of what you're protecting. And then, two-factor authentication, all the updates, all of these are questions that, when you build a PLC with a controller for a robotic arm in a factory floor, that's exactly the conversation I'm having with people. So that's why I was super happy to have you on the IoT show, because I'm having the same conversation. And people must realize that it's not because you're doing a consumer device that it has to be under par in terms of security, in terms of leveraging all what IoT can provide as a technology. And so to me, that's a great example of that. Oscar, we are at time here. People can check out the website. The link is below. Thank you very much for coming today. I hope to see the safe at my pharmacy and other places because I think you're onto something really great. And it's a good example for me to explain IoT to people who are not in that industry, by the way.
Thank you. And if anybody has questions, ask them on our website, and we'll be happy to answer anything.
Awesome.
Thank you
Oscar,
for having
thanks
me.
for coming today.